Bretto, after an extremely tough 2020 for many, it is so exciting to announce our first in real life event for 2021.
Oh, MP, it's an understatement to say we miss connecting with our tribe, but it makes the 2021 Wellness Breakthrough all the more exciting.
If you're ready to rebound or to make a comeback and even make 2021 your best year yet, you are warmly invited to join Brett, myself and an intimate group of like-minded souls at the Wellness Breakthrough from February 5 to 7.
Imagine yourself tucked away in the serene Strzelecki Ranges of Gippsland, Victoria. You don't have to cook, you don't have to clean or do anything domestic. We feed you, we accommodate you, we hold the space for you to create your own wellness breakthrough.
Whether it's in your health, your relationships, work, life, wealth, spirit, any part of your life, you can expect major transformation at our most intimate event.
We'd love for you to join us, but spaces are strictly limited to 20 attendees. And as we record this, we have less than 10 spaces left.
For more info, to watch the highlights of previous years and to join us from February 5 to 7 in 2021, go to thewellnessbreakthrough.com.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Are You Ready for In-Laws and Family at Christmas? Well, are you? Are any of us after lockdown?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, isn't it? God. And, we say after lockdown because that's what it's like here in Australia, but we do know for many of our overseas listeners there, you're facing new rounds of lockdown. So it is a really challenging time, different time for us to be heading into a festive season.
I bet that's really hard for Christmas too. Don't even know what that looks like, but my heart goes out to you if that means that you're suffering without seeing your family or without connection and the support that you need. So big love hug to you.
Yeah.
But what you need is actually humanity, but it's the best we can do from here.
Yes.
So what I would love to do before we have our conversation today is introduce you to this week's podcast sponsor. And that is the gorgeous girls, Ella and Bonnie from The Coffee Clinic. Now, I have to tell you, these girls have been following us in Nourishing the Mother for a very long time. And probably about a year ago, they reached out to me and said, look, we'd love to send you a sample of our coffee. We know that you love coffee, Julie, and we think ours is pretty special. And we'd love to tell you the story that it's essentially my dad's or our dad's artwork or craft that he's been honing, and he's like passionate about his beans and the particular roasting and like all the things, which is just the most delightful thing in the whole world to hear. And he said, they said, we love his coffee so much that
it's crazy that other people can't enjoy it. So that's how we're putting this together. So a sisters team. So I'm just going to read you their bio about them. Hi, we're Ella and Bonnie, two sisters who love coffee and need a delicious at-home solution for when heading to our local cafe isn't an option. Like when the baby wakes way too early. The barista up the road thinks 3 p.m. is a reasonable time to cut off our caffeine supply, or we desperately want a late-night espresso martini. So we took matters into our own hands and sourced the best, fairest, and most delicious coffee we could find. And now we're hooking you up. So I have to tell you that I was like, yeah, look, I'd love to try it. How wonderful. Please, yes, send me some. And no joke, my husband and I were coffee fiends. Like, we're very particular about our coffee. And it's the best coffee I've ever had. So much so that I went, that's it. We're not buying our specially sourced coffee from the city that we get shipped, every few months, because now I can't drink anything but that. I was like, that's it. We're getting this one. And it's sensational. So these girls are in New South Wales. My delivery has always arrived within 3 days. And I'm not joking. It is seriously the best coffee I've ever had. And I would love for you to try it too. You can find them at thecoffee.clinic and have a look at what they've got. So as part of our Kids Kindness Advent, they are contributing a 500-gram pack of coffee beans and a single cup gold filter coffee pour. So we would love for you to have a look and see if that's something even you might love to gift someone at Christmas. The gold filter is absolutely divine and makes a single cup, and the coffee really and truly is the best coffee I've ever had. I'm addicted. I love it. It's the only one I'll drink now. To the point where I go out for coffee with my friends, and I'm like, I can't even, because the coffee I make at home is better. So it looks like I'm having a accolade. Yeah, no, really. I know I don't want that to sound cheesy, like, oh, it's the best coffee ever. Please buy from our sponsors. But I'm really saying, like, I love this coffee. This is the coffee that my husband and I now sit down for our coffee mornings, and it's ceremonial and delicious and seriously the best roast I've ever had. And I simply adore that it's one man's life's work, essentially, that he's potted and toiled away to find what he and his soul and his body desperately love and adore, and that his daughters see that, love that, and want to share that with the world. Like, I just think that's beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and I think about that every time I'm drinking it. So I would really love for you to try it, because it's a totally on point for branding, flavour and price. So I'd love you to check that out at thecoffee.clinic.
And I can say that I love the smell, but because I'm not a coffee drinker, I can't attest to the taste. Although my husband, because he's been drinking it, has been absolutely loving it, and it has inspired me to buy him a coffee machine. So that gets votes all around from my house, even if it's not me who's drinking it.
Well, now you know where to source your coffee from.
That's it.
Your espresso machine.
That's it.
All right. So today, Bridgie, what does it mean for you to think about if you're ready for Christmas with your in-laws and family?
Yeah, good question. So for me, it's becoming aware of the stories that I tell myself about them, about who they are, about how I might see them as different to me, about where I can have a tendency to project what I value onto them. And I love this question because I can see how over time, how I've transformed has transformed how I've been able to meet those close to me in that family way. And as I've recognized my own transformation, I've been able to meet them in more heart-centered ways, recognizing how much our identity can latch onto beliefs, ideas, and ways of being or living that can sometimes have a tone of self-righteousness to them. That means that we can put walls up between ourselves and family as a way to enshrine what we believe in as like the right way or the right way to be or think or act. But what that often does is block our capacity to really meet that other person and to honour who they are and to appreciate their version of love and appreciate the way in which they show up in all of these incredible ways so often that we can miss if we're looking for it the way we think it should be. And so I've enjoyed witnessing myself grow in this kind of awareness in recent years and recognise what boundaries are solid for me and which ones I can see are more fluid as my values have shifted and changed.
And how do you see that play out with family around you at Christmas in particular?
A really big one, I think, for me, and I spoke about this a little bit last year, was noticing that I would have like a visceral reaction to my in-laws and the kinds of presents that they would.
Oh, it was Plastic Fantastic, wasn't it?
Plastic Fantastic.
Yeah, I remember.
And for years, I would just have this like visceral reaction and just make them wrong. And I kind of just, sure, like I'm just like shaking my head at myself for the ways in which I would like judge them. And now I can really open my heart more to the love, right? Even if it might not have been the package I wanted to see it in, that it was really just their way of giving that wasn't necessarily my values, right? If I went when I was very, very probably environmentalist more than I am now, I've found it very hard to see the amount of consumption that was on display.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I can see that sense shifting to my mother now, because in a family, you'll likely notice this yourself if you see polarity in families playing out, that for a period of time, one person might take out one position or one kind of idea. So you might have some vegetarians who are like hardcore vegetarian and you're like the meat eater, for example. And then something might shift a little bit and you'll let go of your staunch ways and they'll take your position. And so I can see this happening. Like even my mum today, like just I could hear in her voice her disdain for the capitalism of Christmas and the way in which she was projecting and by gifting gifts that were handmade and beautiful, but handmade and no consumption. And she even self-checked with me and was like, "Is it okay to like give that?" And I was like, "Of course it is. If those people that you're giving them to share similar values, like, sure." But I could just see that I had previously taken up that space in our broader family, and now my mum was taking up that space, and I just could flow with it. And I thought, how beautiful, because that's what we're always doing in a family dynamic is everybody like a nervous system, like a universe. You're going to have expressions of all parts, and that's what happens within the family. And so it's really interesting to become curious about what you're really black and white on right now, who in your family has the opposite, like opinion or view or way of life, and how is that functional for the whole? And where have you noticed a flip in recent years where maybe they're now taking up the space that you took up? And isn't that interesting? It just, what it does is it brings in a sense of humility, and it brings in a greater opportunity to connect, knowing that we are always evolving and that what we believed and held staunchly onto 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago may not be what we are now holding on to, and will not be what we're holding on to in 5 or 10 years' time. So do you want to be self-righteous and block your heart to the connection that's possible on the other side of your own lens of how things need to be, or can you see a little wider?
So how would you suggest that we soften our lens to see a little wider? Are you saying to be able to see the family dynamics of it's simply all parts expressed, and you could choose to take up that part or not. And if you choose not to, that someone else does, and therefore there's a sense of grace there as opposed to charge.
Yeah, I think we're always going to have an identity that is representative of us, and we can't escape that, and we love that. But it's also recognizing when we have that visceral trigger, like what I was talking about with what I termed as overconsumption, is to notice when we are feeling in our bodies that sense of black and white, right, wrong, there always, whenever, that kind of language and that kind of physiological response. That is just feedback for us to go, whoa, like this is a big charge for me. Like I'm obviously pretty polarized here. I wonder why I am. How's it reflective of what I'm really valuing right now that I see them challenging? How could I see this a little differently? Like, where is the love here? Is often useful to ask ourselves, because we will make love look like what we think it should look like according to what we value, therefore not being able to see their form of it. And then to self-check that language on always and never, and go, oh, okay, well, where are they? Like, actually, sometimes what I say they're not, for example, so that we can see a little wider and stretch our ability to see beyond our black and whiteness. Because all of us want to be seen and heard and loved for who we truly are. That's all any of us want. But it's these triggers and these tension and these stories that get in the way of our capacity to be with that or to see that. And I'm not saying that, like, you're not going to hold on to your animosity or your angst or your story, because sometimes that's come with great pain, right? But I would also ask and suggest entering that curiosity with also the question, what am I getting out of holding on to this? Because sometimes the conflict that we have outside of us, like say outside the immediate unit that you're in now, can be galvanizing. It can be connection building with your intimate partner. So if you've got a war outside of your family, your intimate family is going to be more connected in order to manage the war outside of you. Maybe you're able to build social relationships more effectively because you have family conflict, so you've had to create a family in a different form. So just to look a little wider about, what am I getting out of this dynamic right now, that I say they're this and they're not that, and they can't be this. How am I using that as fuel for my ideas about the world, about myself, about what my children need or don't need, about who my partner is? Just get curious about how that you've almost got a framework for how to live based on the roles that you've cast everybody in, right? And it's just interesting to tease it out. I find it fascinating in working with clients, and even looking at, okay, well, where's that come from? And if they show up like that and you respond like this, and you've got this, you're almost like two forces of like a magnet that kind of can't go any further because you're forcing each other to go the opposite way because of the tension here. Well, what if you change, and then that's going to shift the way that they're behaving because you've taken a different step, you've interrupted the pattern of that relationship. Because this is happening in every relationship, not just our intimate one, which when you speak about this, at length in Queen School and with all of your work in intimacy around, it's not changing the other, right? It's not making them be different for you. It's getting curious about how you're relating and what you're making them mean or it mean.
It's so funny though, isn't it? Because it's such a values. It just, as you were saying that, then I'm like, oh yeah, I do. That's true. Yep, true. And yet I struggle to apply that to family.
And I think too, because of family, like if you consider our neural pathways, which you and I are always talking about this, like if you've got like a really deep, like well-worn neural pathway, like that's like decades old, that someone is this and someone can never be that, and I am this in relationship to that person, like that's an intense like story
Yeah.
to unravel.
Yeah, yeah.
And to the degree to which we don't want to unravel it is the degree to which we're also gaining some level of benefit from it. Because,
totally. Which is, I love what you're saying, is what am I getting out of holding on to this dynamic?
Yeah. Because if I thought the opposite, what would that mean for who I am right now and how I'm showing up in the world? And who, like, like it begins to pull at a thread that sometimes we're not comfortable with unraveling yet. And so it's safer to cast everybody in these roles or make the meaning that we make instead of pulling and tugging at that thread and allowing it to unravel and see what's really there.
I love that question. Like, how could the opposite also be true? Or how could I show up in the opposite way and see what happens, essentially, right? How would you suggest someone go about doing that when they are sort of in a well-worn pathway of a bit of repulsion or rejection or charge of some sort? What do you think about that?
I think the first step is noticing that you're doing it. Because even as you notice that you're doing it, you begin to change it.
That's true.
Because you're becoming aware. Because even, I find this so fascinating, even as a modality or as a set of theories, psychology is incomplete as a school of thought or as a practice, because the person who's analyzing the mind is also in the dynamic. So no one, so you go and have talk therapy, but the person you're seeing has their own set of stories relating to what it is you're coming to talk to them about, who's casting their analysis, and they're also immediately in the dynamic too with you. So they're not an observer. So the power of simply observing yourself of what's happening is observing yourself almost like at a bird's eye view of going, I'm going to start taking, I can see myself wanting to think this. I can see myself wanting to act like that. Oh, that's interesting. Pause, breathe. What do I really want to do here? What would it be like? And it will feel like so clunky and awkward and like almost like you're trying to write with your opposite hand, taking that different action, staying that little longer in the tension, like not closing down, or like, quickly changing the subject. Like, what would it be like to take a breath here? To simply just be with the discomfort, maybe, of not taking up the space that we usually take up.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think sometimes it's subtle. It can be subtle like that.
It can be a very private moment in a lot of ways, can't it?
Yeah. I don't even know that it's necessarily something that you need to expressly have out with someone either, because remember that it's not about necessarily getting them, going head to head and trying to change something. It's often simply because we're all energy, you shifting the energy that you have about this situation, and it allows it to reorganize itself.
Dissipates. Yeah, totally. You'd said something earlier when we began, which is that we can use conflict or the hurt as armour. I'm just wondering if you could talk around that.
Yeah. I think that this stems from, this reminds me a little bit actually of some of the work that you talk about in terms of you talk about like with women and with the feminine who's hurt, and she's got this like glass
like a dome
over the rose as a way to protect herself, and so it becomes like another cage where you can't meet beyond it. Like you can't like touch into that if there's a cage around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hurt is almost like it's easy to be in conflict and not have to feel the pain of what's really here, because at least in conflict I'm kind of like I can take my like combative move, or I can like defend this space and this story that I've got here and the hurt that's actually underneath my anger, because I can't let you see me fully, or I can't be met here. So it's safe for me to put up all of these walls and hold on to beliefs that I have that, as you know, that staunchly oppose your own, in order for me not to feel the chasm of hurt that might actually really be here if we were to take off all of that armour essentially, or that glass dome that's around my vulnerability that's preventing me from really meeting you. Because you can't really meet someone if you're angry at them, or if you've cast them into a role that means that they're so different from you that you can never connect. Because if they're so different, how could you possibly ever see eye to eye? How could you possibly ever meet their heart if they're, you know, all of these things that you say that they are and that you're not?
Yeah, then you'd never have to, would you? Because
No.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to go there. You wouldn't have to meet your own vulnerability, essentially.
Yeah.
And sit with that. Like, there's a lot of story that's come up for me this lately with like my brother, now that he's having a family, and he's grown his business like exponentially, which I think is amazing. But it taps me into all of my own like wounding stories about like not being good enough and like not being successful, or, you know, on a financial sense, right? Like in terms of if you look at each other on paper and like our achievements, also because culturally we don't value motherhood. So write off those like 8 years or whatever. But on paper, and, you know, if I wasn't able to sit with my own pain of that and be with my like insecurity, then I could just write off his work in the world or who he is as not mattering or less than, or, well, I wouldn't do that anyway, or, you know, explain it away as a way to not feel what it brings up in me.
How do you sit with your own pain in that?
I kind of like poke at it.
Insecurity, I think you said, wasn't it?
Insecurity. And for me, it's just like, it's actually feeling like my heart's space with it. Like actually going into that tenderness and going, oh, like, hi, how you doing in there? Like I feel almost like it's like a little dance that I have with that space within my body. And I kind of gently like stroke it and kind of like touch into what else it might be representative of. Like I even had this weird, like I was telling my mum, I had like, you know, when you're asleep but you're not quite asleep, you're kind of in between sleeping and waking. And I was having this like like inner conflict or inner like fight with myself, but I think it was my brother, around I didn't want him to pay for things. I didn't want to be saved. And so it was like I was in my own subconscious is trying to wrestle with this story at the same time as I'm consciously tending to it, which I think is genius because I'm doing the work, right? But you can't do the work on your own stories if you're casting everybody else into roles and creating distance and shutting down. You just can't, because you've made it, you've otherized it so much in order to protect yourself from your own vulnerability.
Boom.
Whereas I'm like, hey, let's just like be with this and own it.
I love it so much. It always reminds me of what is a successful life for you? It doesn't have to mean anything about anyone else or their choices or their values or the way that, like, it doesn't have to mean anything. All that matters is that you're choosing the actions towards the life that you define as successful. Like I love reading your posts, and I love reading Meg Berryman's posts. I love reading these women that are intelligent and deep and defined in so many ways, and honouring deeply of the value of life and motherhood, and having a level of conscious awareness around the life you choose to lead. And I do think that's such a beautiful conversation to have, isn't it? Because it's easy to get judgy McJudgy about whoever.
Yeah.
Right? Especially at Christmas time, especially when one year is ending and another year is beginning. Like, it tends to be a bit of a cataclysmic time for any of your underlying and, dare I say, already present insecurities to come screaming to the surface.
Totally. And then I also think that they're here like as well at a perfect time to call us into our next level of growth. Like there's an edge there that if we can stay with it.
If we choose it, right?
Yeah. Like, how actually is jealousy, or is insecurity, or is vulnerability, or all of those things, how are they actually not these negative emotions you need to get rid of, but actually deeply purposeful and trying to wake you up? Or not even wake you up, pull you forward.
Pull you towards
something. Something that you're actually desiring and maybe haven't given yourself permission to experience, to value.
Totally. So I love that invitation of when we're dancing around family and in-laws, instead of going straight into, as you say, otherizing and casting this wall between the self and the other, is to ask yourself the deeper questions, and at the same time to not project your values and play your movie onto them, but instead go, look at the life they're choosing. Look at the values they're choosing. I hope that's a delicious definition of success for them, because what it reminds me of is how important my values are to me, or how important the choices I make are to me. And sometimes we need a reminder for our own why, and often our family will play that role beautifully.
So often, because it's a little bit like it's similar to me, like a big why for me, like a big thing that can push me back into my why is like witnessing what I see as really awful parenting. Yeah, and this is for you too, like you've posted about this before.
Totes.
It's enormously galvanizing, like it's energy giving.
Oh, that is why I do what I do.
Yeah. And why do you need that now? Like, how is that powerful?
Exactly.
And conversely, like we're talking about mirrors, we can't see anything that we don't already have. So if I'm seeing all of this wealth, well, where's my wealth? Because it's not missing. This might not be in a quantified financial form. But if I was to quantify it financially, it would equate to that. Because I cannot see it if I don't already have it. So it's asking us to wake up our form.
Yeah.
And if our form is in a less empowered way, how do we empower it?
Yeah.
And then that takes us from this position of being a passenger or a victim to being a front row, seat driver of our own destiny.
I love that invitation.
We need to ask ourselves the questions and be with the discomfort as we navigate it.
Yes, well, as you often say, the quality of our life is defined by the quality of the questions we ask ourselves, right? So if you stay in your own world and you don't ask yourself the questions to stretch outside of it, then that's not called growth.
No. It's called creating cushions around yourself to make you comfortable.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
So we would really love for you, particularly as we make this very slippery slope slide and descent into Christmas and the ending of what has been possibly the hardest year for most people they've ever lived, that it is a time for, I want to say nourishing, but I'm not sure that holds as much weight for some people as it does for me. So what I mean by that is really allowing yourself to take stock of the year that has been, because everybody I speak to is exhausted and everybody is carrying some level of anxiety about getting back out there or life starting up again or being that busy again. And regardless of your experience of COVID, it brought up sludge for everybody.
Yeah.
And often that sludge, when it's old and stagnant, can take a really long time to move. So really letting yourself have like the buffer, the comfort that goes, this is hard and this is okay. I can move slower. I can offer myself as much support in terms of structures and nourishing foods and a nourishing routine and all of those things, good sleep that allow me to function as best as I can right now while I'm mid-processing, because I do think that's one, what this time of year is, and two, particularly after the year we've had, it is a time of processing and integrating. It is a time of kicking out the old sludgy stuff and starting to peel like a skin peel it off and see who's underneath, see what's.
And it's also a mind fuck as well. I was saying to another school mum, like, we've just come out of like, I don't know, what are we, 2 months out of like zero routine, no structure, into full on school extracurriculars, everything, organized down to the minute.
I know.
And now we're about to have our kids home again for 7 weeks.
I know.
Something with no structure again.
Yeah.
I'm like, how am I going to do this? I don't even know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah, no, it really, that's what everyone I speak to is in their own way struggling. I don't necessarily see that one person's struggle is greater or less than another's. I just think that everybody is struggling. And so that often means that our fuse is shorter, or our capacity and tolerance is less, and therefore our triggers and the emotional storms that tend to elicit between family members will likely have a bit of a magnifying glass on them.
Our tendency to otherize will be possibly, and other people's tendency as well, will amp up because more and more people are in that survival response, essentially.
Yes, definitely.
And have been for months and months and months.
Definitely. So if you need to write these questions down, print them off and tuck them away in your wallet or put a reminder on your phone, then please do those things. If you know that what gets you through a period of increased stress are some pillars of nourishment, like, dare I say it again, sleep.
Yes.
Every mother needs sleep. So if something needs to change for you to get deeper, better quality sleep, then please do that. Please do that.
And I really want to say too on that topic that it works until it doesn't work. Like I was saying to Julie before we started recording, like she's out to 18 months now, and I've been feeding her to sleep her whole life. And now it's not working anymore. And so now, like, my thing that always worked is not working, so I have to change, and it has to change. And so that also requires like a building of resources and a reconfiguring of how we do our rhythms. And there can be an uncertainty and sometimes a little bit of free fall in that, but that's also asking us to soften into the transitions we're asking ourselves to make and asking our babies to make too.
Totally. That's a fly. It won't leave. We're recording on video, so there's a fly on the video.
I was wondering what that was.
I do think Christmas Day, if you need things to be a certain way for your child or children, if you need to, carry your buffers with you, or you have to be home at these times, then, I really invite you to see how you can make that a win-win, or how you can offer that more gently within family dynamics. Or
sometimes you'll know, like, can you notice your tendency to want to people please and maybe just scale it back a little this year?
Yeah, like what would it look like to change that up a little bit? So I really invite you into all of those questions, and we would love to hear from you how you go with that. And if something's really challenging or tricky for you, then we definitely invite you into Soul-Driven Motherhood, where in December we're spending the whole month on triggers before we move into really taking stock of the year that was, so we free ourselves to create the year that will be. And then we do that every January in Amplify. So come join Soul-Driven Motherhood. It's just $39 for the entire month. There's weekly workshops, a plethora of 11+ courses, all on conscious parenting and relationship, and a network of women that will offer you the most profound, deeply seen and heard advice. Like, it's extraordinary. So if you're talking about nourishing and creating your own buffers and resources, it's 100% a soft pillow to land on. So please come and find that too. And to connect with you, Bridget,
it's SuburbanSandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
Is julietenner.love.
Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.